Estamos en el espacio marcial en el programa número 20 ya, con un invitado muy especial, ya que como que nos amplía un poco más la visión de lo que son las artes marciales, y vamos a tener una conversación muy detallada de lo que hace, de lo que él en este caso hace, porque aparte de practicar, que he visto videos de él, también educa en la parte de la historia y todo lo que tiene que ver con su sistema, en este caso Artes Marciales Africanas. Le doy la bienvenida a Juan y le damos el pase al maestro.
Bueno, gracias nuevamente, ya es reiterativo y lo digo siempre, excelente invitado, excelente programa. Para mí las artes marciales africanas, un tema muy interesante, después lo voy a comentar un poco más, porque tuve una pequeña cercanía con eso y nada, un gran entrevistado, muy interesante programa y mucho por hablar. Yo creo que lo anticipo que vamos a quedar faltos de tiempo, pero va a ser un excelente programa.
Sí,
Gracias por estar acá, maestro.
Así que le damos la bienvenida al maestro profesor Myrie. ¿Cómo está? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. La primera pregunta que quería hacer era con respecto a la asociación que usted tiene, una asociación donde recopila la parte histórica, donde en este caso trata de enseñar no son solo la cultura, sino que también las armas, las vestimentas. Cuéntanos un poco de eso, Juan.
Yeah. His first question, do you want me to translate the questions, or?
I think I understand it. He's basically asking about the Hama Association and what we do. And okay,
yes, the culture, the weapons, everything, yeah.
All right, did you want me to explain in English or Spanish?
Well, English is easier for you, so we go with English.
Okay.
So, whatever is easier for you.
Okay. So the Hama Association is an association that studies the military history, warrior culture, and martial arts of Africa and the diaspora. And so what we do ranges from everything to classes, documentaries, research, translation, everything that we can do to achieve the objectives of promoting the martial culture and the military history of Africa. So we get a lot of great information.
Okay. Dice que el fin de la asociación Hama es estudiar, hacer clases, presentar documentales e información sobre la historia militar y la cultura de África, y que básicamente es el fin de la asociación.
Okay. Bueno.
So, how do you get involved with African martial arts?
I started actually researching for a book. I was writing a book, and it was based on African culture. And I needed to have a better understanding of how martial arts and warfare was approached in Africa. And so I got into starting to do the research. I met some friends online, including Don Stith, who is the president of the association. And from there, the rest is history. We just started professionalizing it and building an association for that interest.
Okay. Dice que está leyendo un libro y necesitaba recopilar más información sobre... bueno, perdón, le pregunté cómo llegó a la arte marcial africana. Dice que estaba leyendo un libro y necesitaba recopilar más información sobre la parte militar y de combate de África, y ahí empezó a interiorizarse y empezó a conocer más gente online como Damon Sip, y ahí fue avanzando y empezó el proceso.
Actualmente, bueno, yo vi unos videos donde ellos practican, en este caso, practican solamente con armas o mano vacía, lucha.
He's asking, do you train only with weapons, or you train empty hand or some kind of wrestling? What do you cover on your martial arts?
So the group, it depends. We've divided the study into the what we call the 6 regions of Africa. So the north, the south, east, west, the central, and the diaspora.
Okay, let me translate part by part so I don't forget. Separan el grupo en 6 partes, norte, sur, este, oeste, el centro y lo que llaman la diáspora. Please continue.
And so each region has its own different approaches to all of those styles.
Y cada región tiene su distinto enfoque en los estilos.
For example, my style is from the north.
Su estilo es del norte.
So we fight with the stick, the sword, axe, spears. We wrestle, but there isn't a lot of boxing or kicking. But wrestling and fighting with weapons is what you have in the north.
Okay.
But,
y su estilo es del norte y usan bastón, espada, lanza y hacen lucha, pero no hacen mucho boxeo ni patada. Please continue.
Yes, but in other regions, you have more wrestling, or you have more kicking and punching, like kickboxing in Madagascar. So it depends on what region is being studied by the individual.
Yeah. Dice que en otras regiones obviamente hace más patadas y golpes, por ejemplo el kickboxing en Madagascar, pero depende siempre de qué región te remitas para ver qué tipo de arte hacen. Talking about African martial arts is very complex because it's a whole continent. It's like 5,000 years of history. So do you want me to focus on more on what you do on the north, or do we do some general questions? How do you feel it would be better to organize it?
I mean, I can talk about both. I think talking about the whole continent and sort of what that means for the regions, it's complicated, but I think it's more important. I can talk about my own personal journey as well to give examples.
Okay, so we go general and then we focus. Is that good for you?
That's good for me.
Yeah. Solo le pregunté como un paréntesis si como era tan grande el tema quería verlo en general o que nos enfocáramos en su arte. Ahora voy a proceder con mi pregunta. So I think most people, or there's many people, martial artists, here in Chile, almost no one knows about African martial arts. People don't understand maybe the culture of it's the whole continent is 5,000 years of history or even more, maybe much more. You got Egypt. Egypt is part of Africa, so people don't realize how vast and how the big amount of information is from African martial arts. So do you think it's like how do you approach the whole information? How do you start when you introduce people to this huge amount? You go by region, as you said, or you go by years? Like it's not the same 5,000 years ago than 100 years ago. So how do you go to explain this huge amount of information?
Well, we start generally. So we'll say African martial arts or historical African martial arts is the category. It's kind of like I draw parallels, like you have Asian martial arts. In Asia, you have karate, kung fu, and jiu-jitsu, and kalari payatu, and all of these other arts that are all Asian. So we try to explain that, think of Africa the way you would think of Asia. In some parts, you have a particular style. In other parts, you have a particular style. Some parts have influence around the world, like you have capoeira in Brazil, or you have machete bordón in the Caribbean. You have, esgrima con machete or esgrima con machete in South America. And all of these, have a different cultural context depending on the person that you talk to. So it really depends on, what that person's interest is. But what I will say in general, to keep it simple, is I draw parallels to something that someone already knows and explain it in those terms.
Okay, please let me translate. Le pregunté que dado a la gran cantidad de información, porque cuando uno habla de artes marciales africanas, uno está hablando de un continente con una cultura de por lo menos 5.000 años de cultura, un continente completo, es demasiada información. Le pregunté cómo lo hacían ellos para comenzar a enseñar a introducirte en esto, si los que lo hacían por sector o por fecha, y me dice que que parten en una idea más o menos general y va haciendo un paralelo con Asia, que es algo que la gente ya entiende. La gente ya entiende que en Asia hay kung fu, hay karate, hay kalaripayat, hay distintas artes marciales, entonces va enseñando con algo que la gente ya conoce, que ya está familiarizado, va haciendo un paralelo a lo que es África. Pero también se va ajustando a los intereses de cada persona, porque, bueno, ahí también señala que las influencias de las artes marciales africanas también han salido fuera, como el capoeira o los estilos de machete de Centro y Suramérica, pero básicamente lo toma haciendo un paralelo desde Asia a África para poder explicar a la gente con algo que ya más o menos tiene un margen y una comprensión.
¿Quieres agregar más? ¿Algo más?
Me parece que no.
¿No? La pregunta es una pregunta que siempre se hace. Muchas personas piensan que las artes marciales como conjunto organizado de técnicas para enseñar, o en este caso como herencia, viene netamente desde Asia algunos, otros dicen que desde la India, otros dicen que desde Grecia. ¿Qué es lo que piensa él? ¿Cuál es la opinión de él?
He asked, how do you feel about, mostly when you talk about martial arts, people go to Asia, they say they come from Asia, or maybe they might say India or Greece. What's your thought on that? How do you feel about that?
Well, I like to go with the idea that nobody knows where martial arts actually come from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because every culture has an ancient tradition. In Egypt, you go back 5,000 years. In China, you have records from 5,000 years ago for a different style of fighting. In India, you go back 5,000 years, they have something. So every culture in the world where people fought, they had a style or a way to do it. So, you know, we can say what is the oldest on record, but we can never say who started it because we just don't know.
Yeah. Dice que siempre con respecto a ese tema, él siempre dice que nadie sabe, porque en donde sea que los seres humanos hayan estado en algún tipo de conflicto, habían desarrollado algún tipo de sistema de combate. Por lo tanto, si tú vas a Egipto hace 5.000 años, tenían un sistema de combate. Si tú vas a China o a Grecia, tenían sistemas de combate. Por lo tanto, no se puede saber quién partió. Básicamente, en donde hubiese gente y hubiera un conflicto, había una manera de combatir.
Claro, pues es como el típico debate de dónde nació. ¿Ya, Juan?
Another question is, I think African martial arts would be great to have a discussion about that. Empty hand, do you think empty hand is, let's say, new on the history of martial arts? Because on the past, martial arts were literally martial arts, so you need to have weapons, and it was always weapon oriented or weapon martial arts because it was for war. So then lately with the time, we start having different like firearms or different kinds of society where you cannot go around with a spear or a sword. So do you think in your study of martial arts, have you found except for wrestling that also is part of the weapons, but have you found forms of empty hand that are very antique, or do you think empty hands is a newer concept?
It's very old. I can give you some examples. So in ancient Egypt, you have images of people doing a style of Mediterranean boxing going back several thousand years. So they have a different stance. It looks very similar to what you see the Minoans or the Greeks doing. You also have a style of kickboxing from Madagascar that goes back to the 1500s, possibly earlier. You have other styles of fighting. I mean, the way I look at it is people had to learn how to fight without a weapon because you might lose your weapon on the battlefield. So if you don't have your stick, then how are you going to fight the other person?
Yes.
If you don't have your knife, how are you going to fight the other person? And I think that wrestling should be considered an empty-handed way of fighting because if you lose your weapon, you have to wrestle the other person to get theirs or to beat them. So empty-handed fighting, in my view, has been around just as long as weapon fighting.
Ok. Le pregunté si él consideraba que las artes marciales antiguas venían desde las armas y que el concepto de mano vacía era un concepto más moderno por el tema de que antiguamente eran aplicadas para la guerra y obviamente ibas a ir armado. Claro. Pero me dice que no, que son paralelos, que hay grabados en Egipto donde están haciendo un tipo de boxeo mediterráneo similar al que se podría haber hecho en Grecia. Había kickboxing en Madagascar en 1500. Entonces dice que claro, igual había que saber pelear a mano vacía por si perdías tu arma. Por lo tanto, dice que son paralelas, que no es que primero era solo arma y después fue cambiando a mano vacía.
Con respecto al tema de las armas, siguiendo esa misma línea, ¿cómo preguntarle, Juan, cuál es el arte que él hace? Para que no expandamos a todos los... El arte que él hace, ¿cuál es el arma que más se utilizaría, o en este caso se adaptaría a una situación, en este caso, por ejemplo, adaptarlo a una situación, por ejemplo, callejera? ¿Cuál sería como la arma que podría, por ejemplo, si es un bastón, yo podría pescar, no sé, con una escoba y hacerle bastón?
Sí. So in the keeping a little bit on the line of the weapon, in your own style, which traditional weapon that you use that comes from traditional African could you adapt a little bit to the let's say street or self-defense for today in a common city? Which weapon or would you could adapt? Maybe if you have a big stick, change it for some other thing, or how would you do that? Is that possible?
I think that, and I have to be very careful with how I say this, because modern self-defense is not my style. I mean, the styles that I use, they were on the battlefield, 1,000 years ago. So
yes,
the context isn't the same. But
I understand what you're saying.
But I will say that if you were looking at ways to protect yourself in the styles that I study, I mean, there are still people in Egypt who fight with sticks on the street when they don't like each other. So, yeah. I mean, the basic idea of stick fighting is still, I think, very valuable. I think some of the knife fighting traditions are still viable. I mean, if you'll indulge me.
Yes.
Every culture has a knife similar to this. If you can fight with this, you could fight with this in any time period. So some of the basic things like learning how to hook or learning how to stab or where to stab, they would apply. But modern combatives are obviously better for that because they're designed for today, not 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. Let me please translate. Bueno, dice que quiere ser muy cuidadoso en lo que va a decir porque la defensa personal no es su especialidad. Él se especializa en artes que eran concretamente para la guerra, por lo tanto no tienen los conceptos que podría tener la defensa personal para alguien que se dedique a la defensa personal. Sin embargo, nos dice que, por ejemplo, en Egipto todavía la gente se pelea a palos. Yo puedo agregar que en Centroamérica, incluso acá en Chile, se ve de repente un machete ahí, peleas de machete. Entonces, no es tan descabellado encontrarte con las mismas armas y con las mismas técnicas que te encontraría en las artes marciales tradicionales. Ahora también da el ejemplo del cuchillo. Casi todas las culturas tienen un cuchillo similar al que él mostró. Claro. Por lo tanto, saber apuñalar, cortar, enganchar, no es ajeno a la defensa personal ni al contexto que tú te podrías encontrar comúnmente en la calle.
¿Verdad?
So, African martial arts, would you say they come in, this is a complex question for me because like history, I don't agree as much with the traditional history. So, but would you say it starts from the stick, then it evolves to the manufacture of being able to do metal or different materials for weapons? Do you think it comes from sticks, or maybe metal was always there? So what's your thought on how does the weapon evolve in African martial arts?
Well, I'll keep it simple. Africans were the first humans to use weapons, and this is what I mean by that. If you believe in evolution and you believe in the out of Africa theory, then you know that the first human beings come from Africa, and they were using spears, and they were using knives, and they were using clubs. The oldest example that we have of weapons being used in battle goes back about a little bit more than 10,000 years ago, in Lake Turkana in Kenya, where they found bodies from 10,000 years ago that were killed with spears and knives and rocks.
Okay. So knives, but knives were made of steel or metal or stone?
Originally stone, because that's what everybody had. But if we want to talk about metal, aside from North Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, I don't like the term, but Africa south of the Sahara, you know, Black Africa, they didn't have a Bronze Age because they jumped directly to iron.
Okay.
So they, for example, while the rest of the world was using bronze, in Central Africa and in West Africa, they were already using iron.
Okay, can I please translate so I don't forget information?
Sure.
Le pregunté cómo él consideraba la evolución de las armas en las artes marciales africanas, si es que venían del palo y luego poco a poco, a medida que fue avanzando la tecnología metalúrgica, pudieron ir incorporando distintos aspectos, o cómo veía la evolución en general de las armas. Dice que en las armas en la humanidad, si es que nos remitimos a la teoría evolutiva, que toda la humanidad viene desde África, las armas vendrían desde África, todas. Que las más antiguas encontradas son en Kenia de hace 10.000 años. Había una lanza, cuchillos, pero de piedra, y ciertos garrotes. Sin embargo, nos dice que, por ejemplo, en el centro de África y en el oeste de África no tuvieron una era de bronce, saltaron directo al acero. Entonces, hasta ahí vamos. Ahora le voy a decir si puede seguir. Please continue.
Sure. So, in terms of the weapons, I mean, in Africa, all over the continent, they had weapons as long as everybody else has, if not longer.
Yeah.
You know, because the first humans walked out with spears, right? But in terms of training in every part of the continent starts with the stick. So it doesn't matter if you're learning the saber or if you are learning how to fight with a broadsword or a battle axe. Everybody starts with a stick.
Okay, but would you say spear is the mother of all weapons?
Spear is the king of the battlefield. As far as weapons that human beings have used, it is next to the hand axe, which is basically just a sharp rock. It is probably the oldest manufactured weapon that humans have used.
Yeah. Entonces, nos dice que, sin embargo, pese a toda la cantidad y diversidad de armas que hay en África, cuando tú aprendes a usar armas en toda África se parte por el palo, por el bastón. Da lo mismo si estás aprendiendo lanza, hacha o lo que sea, partes por el bastón. Pero le pregunté, como para cerrar un poco la pregunta, si él consideraría de todas maneras, porque vuelve a señalar que la lanza es la más antigua, que si considera que la lanza es como el padre o madre de todas las armas. Me dice que la lanza es el rey del combate. La lanza es la reina de la guerra. So you want to add something else, or we go to the next question?
That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
That's good.
Thank you. Sí.
Vamos
con la próxima.
Sí, lo que yo quería preguntar era ¿cómo se lo planteo? ¿Cuál es ¿cómo se llama? El programa, si tienen un programa de entrenamiento para, en este caso, educar a las personas que quieren entrenar en el arte marcial, en este caso su sistema de arte marcial.
In your the system you train, how is the progression for the teachings? So you already say you start with stick, but how is the progression?
Sure. So I'll speak specifically to one of the styles that I do, which is modern tahtib. So modern tahtib actually has, and I have it with me, it has a manual. So we have sources. You can, so you start, there are about 4 levels. So you start learning the basic techniques, then you start learning the forms, and as you progress with the forms and as an educator, you go up in the levels. There are 4 with that. With some of the others, they have a less rigid structure. So with Matreg, for example, which is another stick fighting style that I do, generally you are recognized by the community or by the elders when they say you are good enough to teach or you're good enough to start your own school. So they don't necessarily give you a belt or a certificate, but they watch how you practice, how you teach, the techniques you learn, and sort of the elders of the community will decide if you're good enough to go forward.
Okay. Dice que, por ejemplo, en Modern Tahtib, que es uno de los que entrena, hay un manual y hay 4 niveles en los que tú vas ascendiendo y vas aprendiendo. Pero en otros estilos, como el Matrek, que también es un estilo de palos, es mucho más libre y depende de la persona mayor que te está enseñando. Él decide cuándo pasa a lo próximo y cuándo también te autoriza a enseñar algo.
Okay.
Yeah. Since I'm going to use those 2 styles you just mentioned. Those are, do you think those are because the immigration of Africans, maybe I have heard of them in France, for example. Do you think the immigration of Africans to Europe also is helping to develop maybe the stick fighting? I don't know if the weapons, but at least bringing the stick fighting to the light, to the new persons, new communities, because I have heard those both styles from some people in France and maybe some Arabs also. Do you think that when people is moving from zone to zone, they bring that and it's making spread?
Yes, I think so. Because I think what's important is, so for example, my teacher, Dr. Adel Goulad, who teaches modern tahtib or founded the school, he is based in France.
Yeah, I have seen him. Yeah.
Yes, and so his work provided him with the infrastructure in the community. There's an old Christian saying that a prophet is a prophet everywhere but in his home.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
Basically, what that means is, in Egypt, he got respect and people followed him and listened to him, but they were so used to it that nobody was thinking, well, let's professionalize it, let's build a business on it, let's, get other people who are not Egyptian to practice.
Yes.
But when he went to Europe, all of these people suddenly started showing interest. People who were not Egyptian would come and study, and that's what's important. Because if you want the art to spread, you have to open the community.
Yeah. And then that goes back to Egypt and the people value more. Do you think that then it goes reverse? They say, oh, these people value it, might be valued. Do you think it goes then when they see it in other place, they realize what they had was very valuable?
Exactly, because after he started to grow and he started to professionalize it, he got it recognized by UNESCO. You started seeing professional schools appearing in Egypt.
Yeah.
So people who were masters for years and everybody respected them and knew them and studied under them, suddenly they begin to turn it into a business and professionalize it and package it so that people from outside of Egypt can come and study, or people inside of Egypt can come and study and continue the tradition.
Yeah. Le pregunté cómo veía él el tema, porque en los estilos que él mencionó, Modern Tahtib y Matrek, yo los dos los había visto en Francia. Por lo tanto, le pregunté sobre el éxodo hacia otros países y cómo veía él que eso, a su vez, llevaban la cultura de las artes marciales por lo menos de los bastones se ve bastante en ciertas partes de Europa, que estilo africano. Y me dice que precisamente su maestro vive en Francia y enseña en Francia, porque en Egipto tenía respeto como maestro de táctil, pero no era valorado, nadie lo valoraba, no había una profesionalización de la actividad. Y una vez que empiezan que él se queda en Francia y empieza a enseñar, abre una escuela, hay gente que viene de otros lados, todos quieren aprender, y una vez que la gente de Egipto ve eso, se hace el efecto reverso, que es que en Egipto se dan cuenta que lo que tenían era valioso, porque además su maestro logró que lo reconociera la UNESCO. Por lo tanto, en Egipto empiezan a enseñar, los maestros que llevaban años enseñando, pero que nadie les ponía mucha atención, empiezan a abrir escuelas, empieza a generarse una profesionalización, gracias a que salió hacia afuera y fue reconocido afuera. Al volver, tiene el reconocimiento que merecía y que no tenía. Y él señala la típica frase que nadie es profeta en su tierra.